sessions that I planned for this morning bring a certain European flavour to the conference. And as well as myself presenting, I have two colleagues from European-based, but colleagues that I'm delighted are here because they bring a perspective that is truly international. I say international rather than global because global I'm not sure what that means, but international means more than one country. And both of our speakers, myself and my two colleague speakers, have extensive experience of applying particular concepts and perspectives to more than one geographical market. And that I thought would be useful for you to look at that and to see that our industry is moving pretty much the same direction in every market. The problems are pretty much the same in every market, but the solutions can be different. As I experience in every different country that I go to, the opening of the discussion is, yes, but our market is different. And that, of course, is true of every market, and thank God for that. So I'm going to talk about the transition and put some new perspectives on it, but I'm also going to give it a very strong sales focus. As we know, sales has always been key to our business. It will continue to be so. So I've described this as the online digital transition and the sales factor. Very quickly, let me just introduce myself. I think I know most of you. My career started with what was then called ITT World Directories, and I moved into consulting in 1995, and I offer strategic and operational consultancy to not only Yellow Pages publishers, but increasingly people who are also serving the SME marketplace with online and digital products. And you can see there that I've been doing this in many, many different countries in the world and several countries here in Asia. The third leg of my consulting is conferences, and Yellow Search today is a series of events that we run in Europe, 2 events a year. We're now in our 10th year, and if you're not on the database, if I picked up your business card this week, you will certainly be on the database in the future to hear more about those conferences. Our next conference is in 2 weeks' time in Frankfurt, and we will be concentrating on the issue of return on investment, ROI, for the small business. So that's in middle of November, and then next April we will have what we call a workshop, which is a very practical session looking at a very, very specific area of the sector, and that will be in April next year. Now, these are the subjects that I'm going to cover. I'm going to look at trends. I'm going to look at trends not only in the Yellow world, which I think is probably a more appropriate way to describe what used to be called Yellow Pages. Trends in the consumer world, because that determines those trends. And then I'm going to look in across different publishers about their early experiences in segmentation and verticalization, and always with a sales flavor. So, what are the trends in the Yellow world? Well, here is just shows you the sad story of how revenues in total continue to decrease. This is showing the 2012 against 2011 comparison across the world, and you can see that in all cases total revenue continues to reduce. But you'll see also that some countries are experiencing a smaller rate of decline than in other markets. Some of these countries are now, of course, emerging into becoming one country. The online revenue share, which has always been considered to be a significant feature, to be a significant measure as to whether the transformation is taking place satisfactorily. And so you can see here a number of markets where the majority of revenue is now in online. When I say online, I always mean online digital. I suppose I mean everything except print. But these percentages are also interesting when you start to dig into the detail. Of course, nearly in all cases, people are bundling what they're selling. So they are selling both print and online and digital in different shapes and sizes of bundles. And how you allocate a percentage of that to print and to non-print, in many cases, is rather a nominal split. So it's not that there are split billing themselves are determining what percentage of that is really online and what percentage is print. So these percentages do have a little bit of flexibility around them as to what is truly happening with print and online. Now, the portfolios, as we've already discussed many times yesterday, the portfolios of traditional Yellow Pages publishers increases all the time. This is just a snapshot of the typical type of products that belong to the portfolio. And one of the aspects of this that I'll be discussing is that it's very easy to add products to the portfolio. We have every year new concepts which are digitally based, which Yellow Pages publishers are adding. So it's easy to add to the portfolio, but of course it's not easy to sell it. Again, we discussed yesterday some partnerships that exist. This again is a quick overview of some major publishers and some of their partnerships that until quite recently had Google as a partner for everybody except for SoloCore. Now, of course, they also have a relationship with Google. We saw from Oscar's presentation that print is still very dominant as a revenue contributor. But with the exception of the situation in Israel with that, which where again, it was confirmed yesterday that print has now ceased, I know of no other markets where print has been discontinued. There are some special cases, and this is one in Norway. Eniro in 2012 announced that one of their printed products, the regional Yellow Pages printed product, would discontinue. However, they continue with their local printed product. That's the product called Dids District. And the local product, of course, covers a much smaller scoping area than the regional product. Eniro has now also announced recently that they will follow this strategy in Sweden. So that the Gullisidorna, which is the regional Yellow Pages print, will discontinue during, I think, 2014. But they will continue with Dindel, which is the local Yellow Pages product. Now, those that like to say that print is dead already tend to report that Eniro has now discontinued print, when that is not quite true. They've discontinued regional print, and they continue with local print. One of the interesting aspects of the evolution of Yellow Pages is what are we evolving into? And one of the issues that the salesman has to deal with is that when he is describing that he comes from, whether he says Yellow Pages or whether he has now a new name, it's very difficult for him to describe exactly what is he, what type of company does he represent. And it is, as you may have also noticed from my presentation, when I say I cover more than Yellow Pages, there is no generic term to describe exactly what the market is now. So I just took a quick run through all of the major Yellow Pages publishers to see how they describe themselves nowadays. And you can see here that from 7 examples, there's 7 quite different explanations as to what they do. Now, some of these change quite a bit, and this slide I made 2 or 3 months ago, and it may now already be out of date. But you can see that if the salesman is entering to a customer to say he is from YP, a one-stop shop for local advertising, okay, that has particular message behind it. To say, like SEAT, and this would obviously be in Italian, not in English, but a deliverer of proximity services to SMEs doesn't quite have a ring around it that would be very helpful, I think, to the SMB. So you can see the industry is really uncertain. What is it evolving into? And this is just an indication of that. Now, the consumer world is, of course, is the trigger to everything that we do and the changes in consumer behaviour. And some things influence that consumer behaviour quite significantly. Here you see 2 people that I'm sure you will recognise, and I think we'd all agree that they've had influence in the consumer behavioural changes. This is taking just 1 or 2 slides when I want to show some developments. This is the Facebook situation where we see here that in major continents the growth rate at least is now stabilised, and we have worldwide something like 1.2 billion users of Facebook. And very relevant businesses, but one which is potentially extremely confusing. This shows, again, the Facebook compared with other social media trends. I'll just let you read these rather than try and go into deep analysis on them. This is probably also something which we're all familiar with now. Go and play outside has a different connotation now than it used to have. Teenagers, of course, have their own particular behavior patterns, and we can see here that Facebook is actually decreased in terms of social media share for teenagers. This, I think, is a significant aspect of how social media is impacting the behavior of those that are that are Facebook fanatics. So let's look at some facts about how people behave when they're looking for local businesses. Now, this is data from the United States, and it is probably true of most European markets still. And this still shows that print yellow pages plays a role. But if we add up all the other factors together, then we can see that it still has usage, but it is overall less significant than a number of other media. And as we increase the size of the portfolio, we increase it because there are more and more digital options. So we have to consider many different options when we compare with both print and with search engine usage. So let's look now at some of the questions of segmentation, and particularly from its point of view as it impacts sales. This is a slide that I showed 12 months ago, and it's a slide that I'll probably show in 12 months' time as well, because our business is totally dependent on that sales factor. And I think this is a feature which will continue for a period of time. I also, when talking with publishers, talk about the fact that whilst Yellow Pages has its key strength by having a big sales force, will that also be true in 5 years' time? I remember well when my first meetings with Google back in the early century, and this was way before Google entered reselling programs. My Google colleague in London said to me, you know, it doesn't say much for your Yellow Pages business, does it? That you have to send a salesman there every 12 months to see if he wants to do it again. And I hadn't heard that statement before, and I didn't comment on it at the time, and I took it away and thought about it. Is this a criticism, or is this, what exactly does this mean? And when I had time to think about it, I thought, well, no, wait a minute, this is indicative of the small business marketplace. There are no small businesses that really have a budgeting process that clearly indicates that now it's time to call my Yellow Pages rep to advertise. And of course, Google has since also understood that the small businessman doesn't behave that way. He does need regular contact, not only regular contact, but regular advice. And so now, of course, we have a different approach from Google to dealing with that. But the aspect of the large sales force is something which is, in terms of the evolution of digital transformation, is still very relevant. But can we envision a time in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, when really the small businesses are doing this themselves, and therefore won't need a sales coverage? We shouldn't ignore that factor. So I'm talking about the next short to medium term period, when sales is still obviously very key. I've listed here in summary the 5 main factors which Yellow Pages still has always had as strengths, and may or may not have value in the future. So let's quickly look at some of these factors. The database, of course, is something pretty unique still to Yellow Pages publishers in terms of it being classified and being enriched with content. But we've had a tradition where we put 100% database in the printed directories and distributed it to 100% of the people. And that was appropriate in the past. That's what consumers, at least we believed, wanted. So that's what we got. Now, of course, as print declines, then publishers take the view that, wow, this is an expensive thing to do. We must save money in printing and distributing because usage is going down. And the common approach is to, therefore, to distribute less books, but still producing the 100% database. And I certainly challenge that. If I, as a householder, don't receive the book, then I can be pretty sure that I'm not going to use it either. So giving the same database, which may no longer be appropriate, to the smaller piece of the market is really, in my view, increasing the problem or accelerating the rate of decline of print. Do we need to have the 100% database in the book? I don't think so. Should we not be designing the book to deal with those headings that do still have usage? And if we design the book that way, we considerably reduce the size of it. We make it much more focused, much more targeted, and that in itself will give us significant savings in paper, print, and distribution. At the same time, the 100% database continues to be very key for online directories. I spend a lot of my time conducting sales audits with large sales forces, including Yellow Pages publishers. And I spend maybe 5 days a month out on the road with salespeople. And it is quite amazing seeing how SMEs in many countries have a great loyalty to Yellow Pages. People who have advertised a long time, they may not be particularly sophisticated in terms of consumer trends, and they continue to be loyal and continue to buy. Salesman, of course, is happy to take this, but we have to be extremely careful because this loyalty will not last forever. But it is a significant factor which I think is actually hindering us in terms of making the necessary changes. So our large sales force continues to be a unique advantage that we have. But of course the question is, it's a large sales force, it may be 50% of our employees, but can we continue to afford it? In the days of the single product, of print only, we had a sales force in every country that was so highly productive that it rarely cost us more than 15% of our total revenue. And that was an indication that we had a sales process that was very, very well organized, very well planned, and highly productive. Now that, of course, was based on a once-a-year contact with the customer, and all of those things have now changed. But nonetheless, the cost-effectiveness of our sales force continues to be key. If we have a large sales force, can we afford it? And this leads us into the question of segmenting the market to ensure that if we're making multi-visits to customers, that we're making multi-visits to those customers that offer us revenue potential, that will make it an economically viable proposition. In all Yellow Pages businesses, in order to achieve that very high productivity rate, we had processes which are often called campus planning or sales planning, including market allocation, and these were processes which were very unique to Yellow Pages, but nonetheless ones which still are very valid today, not to campus plan in the way that we used to campus plan, but it is a sales tool, which is very often, well, in all cases, was well supported by clever software. It's a tool which is unique to our industry, and the more companies that I see from outside our industry are lacking this particular tool. So I think we should not underestimate our ability to plan selling. Of course we need to substantially change it. We're not planning now just one visit a year on a 3-month sales canvas, but it is something which is an advantage which I think we underestimate. And segmentation is certainly something that we can apply through this traditional sales approach, sales planning approach. So the sales cost effectiveness is an issue which I discuss now with many publishers. How do we ensure that this large sales force is that we're spending that, making that investment in the right areas to ensure that our revenue potential matches the sales cost? Now, if we segment as well, we're dealing with another issue which is commonly referred to as the salesman as the trusted advisor. The trusted advisor is very appropriate for the small business marketplace where our salesman is giving advice that the small business can trust and can rely on, without needing to go into great complexities about describing how digital products work. So by segmenting, we help the salesman by giving him a very specific piece of the market with specific products to sell and with a specific sales argument. Let me just give you 2 examples from my experiences recently where this trusted advisor approach got a little bit confused. I was working with a publisher in the Southern Europe, and I was spending a day with a field sales rep visiting customers. Now, we had in the few days before I went out with this sales rep, we'd been doing sales training and talking about selling on value, selling on return on investment, selling digital products. And the first call I had with this sales guy, we visited a lady who ran a kindergarten. And she'd had a quarter page in the Yellow Pages print for the last 10 years, and we were going along to renew. So we visited this lady in the kindergarten. She had the directory already open at the page as we came in. Very positive, very happy to see her Yellow Pages salesman. And said, great to see you, what have you got to tell me? And he said, well, let me tell you about ROI and response. And she started to cool down. And she was sitting there and starting to frown, look confused. And he said, well, you need to think about return on investment and where your response is coming from and where your customers are coming from. And she was getting more and more concerned. And after about 10, 15 minutes, she put her hand on his arm and said, are you telling me you're not going to print the book anymore? And he said, no, we're still printing the book. Oh, thank God for that. She said, I thought you were telling me you were going to stop printing the book. Can we just get on with this, because I haven't a clue what you're talking about. And can you just please repeat my print ad? Well, the salesman did that. He pulled out the contract, he signed the repeat of the print ad, and we came out of the call. And walking back to the car, the sales guy said to me, you're not very happy with me, are you? I said, well, we have a contract, so I guess that's the good news, but clearly there is some message here which didn't get through. It would have been very helpful to have said to this lady, you have to understand that your marketplace is changing, and I really think you should be doing more in the online and digital area, and at least to have spread some of that revenue. Because in 12 months' time now, the danger is that you go back to the lady who says, Yellow Pages doesn't work anymore, let's just cancel it. But that was the first call. So then we went to the second call, and this was a locksmith, a guy that makes keys, replacement keys. Very, very small business. It was him and his apprentice. And so now we're going to this customer who was also in Yellow Pages with a quarter column or some display advertising. And as we walked in, the guy said, hey, can you help me with Facebook? Can you get me in Facebook? And the sales guy said, yeah, sure. Wonderful, wonderful. That's the place to go, isn't it? That's the place to be. My daughter's on Facebook all day, and my wife started using it, and all my friends are using it, so let's just cancel the Yellow Pages ad and put all of that expenditure now into Facebook. Can you do that for me? Sure, said the salesman. Sure, yeah. So he just cancelled the Yellow Pages ad and sold the equivalent amount of revenue into Facebook. Then we came out the call and he said, hey, I did well, didn't I? You're pleased with me now. I said, I think we need to go and take a coffee again. So we went to take a coffee and he was now frowning, saying, that was a good sale, wasn't it? This guy's gone digital. I said, wait a minute, let's just think about this. He was a locksmith putting all of his money in Facebook. Now, why is he putting it in Facebook? Because his daughter uses Facebook. Now, your role here is to advise this guy. Now, I'm not an expert on locksmiths, I'm not an expert on Facebook. But it doesn't occur to me that putting all of his money into Facebook is really going to be a sound investment for him. Because I think now the danger is when you go back in 12 months, this guy's going to say, Facebook didn't really work, and let's just cancel the whole thing. So now the sales guy was really confused, because he was somebody buying in print, and I told him that was not necessarily bad, and now he saw someone was in Facebook, and he thought that was good news, but clearly it was not necessarily good news. So we have, in segmentation, we have this potential solution that we are helping the sales guy by giving him advice in advance which products will match which segments, and therefore he can become a much more credible advisor. Because when we consider how we put pressure on our salespeople to be making so many visits a day and so many closes a day, then we really don't help him giving advice in those two examples that I gave of the kindergarten lady and the locksmith. Both of those customers needed very sound advice as to how they should be spending their advertising money. And in both cases, they didn't get it. Even though the publisher was of the view that he'd invested a lot of money in training his salespeople. Okay.
And it's always close by.
So, these are the factors which made us very efficient in sales. You can see here a whole series of things that we always took advantage of. And this is what made us into a high margin business, because our 50% of our sales force bringing the revenue was not costing us a lot of money. Now, nearly all of these factors have either severely threatened or have completely disappeared. So we have now to deal with this issue of segmenting the marketplace to ensure that our large sales force is going to be in the right place, with the right products, with the right customers, at the right time, and with the right appropriate training. We can use the sales planning process that I described as a key support tool for segmentation. And we need to be segmenting the database, we need to be segmenting the sales organization too, and we need to consider the cost relationship. Quite simply, if we say we visit a customer once a year, and now we decide we need to visit him twice a year because he's buying dynamic products, then simply by sending him to visit twice a year, we double the sales cost. And without any doubt, we do not double the revenue. If we suggest the salesman visits a customer 12 times a year, then we've multiplied the sales cost by 12. And we have certainly not increased the revenue by 12. So we need to be ensuring that if we are going to have visits as regularly as 12 times a year, that we're visiting customer segments where at least the revenue potential, not the today revenue, but the revenue potential, will justify that level of sales investment. And then we have to set productivity targets which are appropriate for that particular segment. So those that are visiting every month will clearly have very different targets and a different commission scheme from those of us that are visiting once a year. So this is, leads on then to verticalization of products. And we saw several examples yesterday, and again Zap was a very excellent example of how segmentation completely changes the thinking and mentality about how we offer the products that we have in our portfolio. And that, again, is based on assessing the revenue potential. Now, the sales channels traditionally in Yellow Pages have always been telephone sales, field sales, and a major accounts channel, which would be also premise sales, field sales. And there is a lot of conjecture within the sector as to whether telephone sales can continue to be appropriate for selling potentially complex digital products. And there are examples of publishers saying we now must discontinue telephone sales because we can't possibly try on the telephone to explain how digital products function. And there are also publishers, and Nero in Scandinavia is one of them, that says no, in fact we're going to increase our telephone sales percentage because we take the view that if you cannot sell it on the telephone because it's too complex, then we need to simplify it. And that's a very interesting approach to the sales of digital products. If it is too complex to sell on the telephone, then we've made it too complex, and we need to simplify it. So Eniro has moved more and more towards telephone sales, and other publishers have moved more and more away from telephone sales. I guess there's some cultural aspects in this too, and there's some cost aspects too. But nonetheless, I like the motto that if it's too complex to sell on the telephone, then it's too complex. Because we need to remember that however we select our salespeople, whatever profile we have for the future of our salespeople, we never change the customer. And the customer is in all cases a small business who has his own specialisms in the area in which he works, and they do not include marketing, advertising, or digital science. So we need to find the right balance between the sales profile and the salesman speaking the language of the particular small business. Some publishers are talking about having very, very specific specialist expertise in the sales force to talk to particular segments. That's very difficult to do in a small market. And of course we're working in an entirely new competitive environment, and this is also potential confusion for the small business. I had a case some months back when I visited with a Yellow Pages salesman, a small business, typical Yellow Pages advertiser. And the objective, the salesman told me in advance, was to repeat the print and online Yellow Pages, but also to improve their website, which he'd checked in advance was clearly not very effective. And when we visited this lady, she was in fact quite happy to repeat her Yellow Pages advertising, and wasn't ready to discuss websites at all. The salesman said, look, we have experts on websites, there's no point you having a website unless it's effective, we can help you with that. And she was dismissing this, and finally said, look, I know my website's not working, and I'm talking to the experts about it. Now, this Yellow Pages publisher also had teams of experts, but clearly there was a lack of message being received by this particular business that Yellow Pages had anything to do with websites. And it could easily have been that we were offering toothpaste because the lady didn't see any connection between Yellow Pages and websites. We've mentioned So Local several times already, and it is a very worthy example to look at. And this is just a quick show of the verticalization that So Local is going through, where they have 5 major segments. And their products fit into each of those segments. So each of these are dealt with as a separate vertical. And some of them have print, and some of them have online services, some have digital services. And they can look in each of these segments to see who their competitors are, because they will be different in each segment. And so their whole sales force is being shifted into this pattern. And this is probably the most, one of the most advanced verticalization programs that we see coming from our industry. Some other examples of the first steps towards verticalization: Trouveau in Belgium, as well as So Local in France. They have a particular sales group that only sells to restaurants. Herald in Austria has sales teams only selling to their verticals, and they have some verticals which are an online service for vacations and also for health, for construction. So Local also has a team selling to the health service. Herald again has teams selling only websites. So these are the early stages of segmentation or verticalization, where salespeople become specialists and they're offering particular packages appropriate to that particular market segment. Just wanted to mention briefly a company called Proximedia, which is a Belgian company, which is an entrepreneurial owned and managed company that entered the Belgian market around 6 years ago. And they started by just simply selling videos, then increased that to be selling websites and to be selling SEOs. And their early feedback from the small business marketplace was that many small businesses didn't even use email, didn't even look at internet, didn't even have a laptop. And so the Proximedia changed their approach to offering to small businesses a laptop and to closing a deal with them, which in fact was a lease agreement over 4 years, over 48 months, and they would bill them every month. And they would provide them with hardware, literally give them a laptop, and they would give them a whole day training program. They would send somebody to sit with the small businessman to teach him how to use a laptop. They offered him a 24-hour hotline service, and they started sending him emails on the basis that if they send emails to him, they want him to reply. They also, of course, provided him with a website, with a domain, with maintenance, and with SEO. So the whole package had a long-term future attached to it. Now, I got involved with this company when they were just starting year 5, so they were now starting the first retention period of these people that had been buying 4-year packages. And their retention rate was 91%. And now they have, of course, a large piece of the Belgian market where the SMEs are totally dependent on proxy media for everything to do with online digital internet. And they can't imagine life without it. And the success, or the bottom line, or the top line of that, is that they have now 50 million euro revenue in a market where the Yellow Pages publisher in the same period lost 80 million. So it's interesting how a competitor can have a different perspective, because we may say, well, why didn't the Yellow Pages company think of that? Well, that's not in our DNA traditionally, and they didn't, and they lost accordingly. Truvo in Belgium, and that is the Yellow Pages party in the example I just mentioned, they now sell on a subscription basis, so everybody buys their products now on an ongoing basis. They can cancel it within the first 6 months, but thereafter they have to give a notice period to cancel it. So now there is automatic retention unless the customer decides to say no. And Truvo is also moving to a territory-based sales approach, so that salespeople will be based in their own territory, clearly defined, based on postal areas, and they will service that on a 12-month basis. So this again is quite a significant change from the way Yellow Pages has been sold in the past, and it's ahead of the game in terms of what other Yellow Pages publishers are doing. I mentioned earlier that Eniro is giving more and more focus to telephone sales, and just 1 or 2 more examples. The final comment here, which is one which I'm not personally entirely comfortable with, and that is the trend to say we don't pay our salespeople on commission anymore. The argument being that this is now way too complex, it is not something that we can link to high productivity, and therefore major publishers in Europe are considering now moving to a salary-based only payment system. I'm fascinated and intrigued to see how that is going to work, because commission payment systems for Yellow Pages salesmen is very much in the DNA, and is something which none of us could really imagine would be a basis for running a large sales force. The ROI question and supporting, this is just to mention that Eniro has an ROI newsletter which they send out to all their customers on a regular basis, informing them how the return on investment is measured within Eniro. Now, there's a lot of constraints in making changes in sales, like in any change situation. People are, in many cases, still seeking to cover 100% of the database each year, so that every single business gets a contact. That's clearly very expensive, very unfocused, and doesn't meet any of the targeting criteria, in my view. The ROI data, which all Yellow Pages publishers provide to their salespeople, is very compelling and very supportive of selling all of the range of products. But the reality is, and this again I know from personal experience, is that most salespeople are simply not using it. The call tracking rates are not, in many cases, good enough. The sales training is, I just conducted a survey for our conference in 2 weeks' time, where we asked all the major publishers how much did they invest in retraining salespeople in the last year. And whilst I don't have the exact numbers in my head, I would simply say I was very, very disappointed about how much money is being invested in retraining salespeople. Still, companies tell me, and I witness this again firsthand when I conduct sales audits, is that, well, we don't sell on steps of the sale, or we don't sell on fact finding, or whatever, we just sell on emotion. And that's interesting comment, right? We sell on emotion. What the hell does that mean? We're selling really because the salesperson builds a relationship with the customer, and he somehow is convincing him that he should be buying. And there there is a reluctance also from 3 or 4 publishers that I know well of wanting to concede that selling on emotion is maybe not the way to go in the future. The gap between what often companies publicly declare they're doing in sales and the reality is way too big. I often spend when I'm conducting a sales audit, I spend the first days with the senior management, who are in all cases very proud to tell me how they've now transformed sales into a selling on value, ROI-based sales activity. And 2 or 3 days later, when I go out with the sales guy, I don't see any evidence of that whatsoever. We have an enormous gap between what is publicly declared and, in fact, the actual practice. So, does it have a future to be selling on perceptions, to be selling on emotions? I don't think so, but it's a cultural thing. Maybe in some of your markets you might still feel that this has a great future. Do they have the credibility to be selling digital products? This is something we talked about yesterday as well. And it is true that newcomers in the marketplace are not burdened with large pieces of the sales force that have maybe been selling for 15 years in Yellow Pages and are extremely difficult to retrain. Retraining is much more difficult than initial training. Okay, so that's a very quick overview of what I see happening in the area of sales transformation. I'm, of course, as a great believer in the Yellow Pages traditions and a great believer that Yellow Pages publishers and providers have a great future. We've got to get it right, and I believe that if Yellow Pages in any market doesn't succeed, then I blame the Yellow Pages publisher, because it's not a market factor, it's a question of being alert, and being creative, and accepting the challenges. So I'm a great believer that Yellow Pages has a great future, but I'm equally at the same time extremely nervous that we're moving at a much too slow a pace and that we're ignoring the sales factor. That's the message I wanted to give you, and I think it will be also an item on the agenda for the speakers that are going to come after me. We're going to have, as I mentioned before, 2 more speakers, and at the end of the 3 speeches, we're then going to sit together here at the front and have a panel discussion. So any questions that you have for me or for Paul or for Rasmus, please hold them until we sit together as a panel at the end. So that's my message on the sales factor. I'm now going to introduce to you Paul Wood. Paul is a long-time local search experienced guy. He is UK born, but moved for his education to the United States and has worked in the Yellow Pages sector the local search sector for many years. He has worked in many, many different countries. He is currently the Group Chief Marketing Officer for what is known as FCR Media, a group of Yellow Pages companies spread around Europe. He will explain that to you in more detail. But I'm very pleased that we have somebody that can explain the digital media transition from the perspective of different markets. And I think that, I hope that you'll find that useful, because there's not one solution for all, but we'll have the perspective of different markets. So please join me in welcoming to the rostrum here, Paul Wood.